Welcome to the Qasim Rashid Show, a civil rights lawyer here to expose all forms of injustice with a sprinkling of dad jokes in between. Here's your host, Qasim Rashid.
Good morning and peace be upon you this beautiful Sunday, wherever you're tuning in from. My name is Qasim Rashid, and this is the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View, channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. We've got a phenomenal show lined up today. We've got two amazing guests, Anna McGinn and Jazz Hampton. Anna is an attorney at the Great North Innocence Project out of Minneapolis. She works on exonerating wrongfully convicted persons, particularly Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota. Excited to have her on. Also, Jazz Hampton, a returning guest. Many of you know him as the CEO, co-founder and CEO of TurnSignal, an amazing app that allows you to have a lawyer on your phone when pulled over by law enforcement to help manage and de-escalate the conversation. His work is incredible. I'm excited to have him back to talk about the growth of TurnSignal and the role it plays. My friends, thank you all for continuing to tune in, continuing to share your texts, your tweets. If you're listening to this on Substack, I'm grateful that you're subscribing. And if you want to upgrade to paid, that would be amazing as well. Before we dive into them, before we bring them on board, you're probably noticing massive protests happening at university campuses throughout the country right now, and massive backlash as well. And let me first address something, because I know it's going to come up, and I know I'm going to get emails about it. Anti-Semitism is wrong, it's disgusting, it's horrifying, it has no place in civilized discourse. Let me get that out of the way. That's clear. I've been unequivocal about that throughout my entire career. I'm unequivocal about that right now. And let's keep the conversation going. Not but, and we have to recognize that the vast majority of young people protesting on campus are an interfaith group of Jews, Muslims, Sikhs, Hindus, Christians, people of all faiths and no faith. And what are they protesting? They are protesting the horrific siege on Gaza, something that the ICJ has described as a genocide. As we record this, they are uncovering mass graves in Al Nasser Hospital with estimates of 300 people, civilians, buried in these mass graves. Reports are that many of these are patients who were killed while in the hospital, people who had their hands and legs bound, people in handcuffs with zip ties, killed execution style in the fields and thrown in. And if that doesn't wake you up and say, hold on, something is fundamentally wrong here, I need you to check your pulse, because this is absolutely horrifying. And, obviously the IDF says, well, no, this is not true. This is a Hamas propaganda. Here's a problem I have with that claim. You don't get to be your own judge. That's not how things work. You don't get to ban all Western journalists, kill 150 Palestinian journalists, and say, just trust us, bro. That's not how international human rights law works, but that is what they expect us to do at this point in time. And that's fundamentally a problem. Look, if you're the most moral army in the world, you are eager. You're begging journalists to come in and report on all the great work and all the great humanitarian support that you're providing. You don't censor them. You certainly don't kill them. And you certainly don't demonize them just for doing their jobs, for reporting on what's happening on the ground. But that's what we're dealing with. And look, this is what these young people are protesting. More than 34,000 people have been killed, 70% of them women and children. Last week we had on Dr. John Kaler talking about his work in Gaza. He's there right now. God bless him, keep him safe from harm, and return him home safe and sound. But that is what is being protested. And that's why young people, the conscious of our nation, are out and about peacefully protesting this. And this allegation that they are anti-Semitic is an attempt to delegitimize the noble work they're doing to uplift humanity. And again, are some individual provocateurs being anti-Semitic? Of course they are. We see that right now. But to attribute that to the tens of thousands of students who are peacefully protesting, calling for international human rights law to be upheld, that's just cruel, and that's just backwards. So what we're seeing happening, and is just a stark contrast. Governor Abbott, there's a video of him from 2019 where he's proudly signing a bill condemning these free speech bans. He said, I'm proud to sign this piece of legislation that will protect free speech on our university campuses. That's what he says. He says, I just signed a law protecting free speech on college campuses. And then this week, as peaceful protesters are on public universities, he tweets out, arrests are being made right now and will continue until the crowd disperses. These protesters belong in jail. Anti-Semitism will not be tolerated in Texas, period. Students joining in hate-filled anti-Semitic protests at any public college university in Texas should be expelled. Now, notwithstanding the hypocrisy of this man, a journalist responds that I haven't seen any evidence that these student organizations are anti-Semitic. However, I have reported numerous times of Nazis on Texas college campuses and Abbott doing nothing to stop them or arrest them. That's the hypocrisy that we're facing right now. You've got members of Congress calling for the National Guard to be deployed. It's the irony of the same people who will call liberals snowflakes for asking people to be respectful in their language are now, they want armed military officers to forcibly remove people peacefully protesting an effective genocide. I mean, just the hypocrisy. And I want to emphasize, the hypocrisy is the point. Don't get exhausted by it. Don't give up. The goal is to exhaust you so you no longer care. The goal is to get you to think that your voice doesn't matter, that your peaceful protest doesn't matter. That's the goal. Don't let them convince you that's the case. The reality is that your free speech matters. Your ability to peacefully protest matters. Your ability to be present and to be known matters. Anyone who tries to convince you it doesn't is trying to convince you because the pressure that you're applying is working. And the fact that tens of thousands of students are rising up from Harvard to UT Austin, to USC, to Yale, to Berkeley, it's a powerful thing to see. And I was doing some calculations, and by the time this airs, this will already be out of date. But I looked at, you remember the Unite the Right Charlottesville rally back in 2017? About 600 Nazis from, I think, 39 different states marched, chanting horrific chants, anti-Semitic chants that were not only disgusting but violent. Heather Heyer, a young woman who was protesting these Nazis peacefully, mind you, was killed by a Nazi. So it's this deadly chant where they're demonizing and dehumanizing Jewish people, engaging in murder. Of those 600 people, I looked it up, only five were ever charged or arrested. Right? All of them chanted disgusting anti-Semitic trash, for which Abbott is saying that he's going to arrest people. But only 5 of them were actually arrested. Do you know that so far, nearly 400 peaceful protesters have been arrested simply for protesting this horrific siege in Gaza? How is it? Someone explain this to me. How is it that pro-Nazi genocidal terrorists are treated with more compassion, with more empathy than anti-genocide peaceful protesters? Right? Why are anti-genocide peaceful protesters treated worse than violent pro-genocidal Nazis? It's just such an unjust system when you look at it from that lens. But that is what we're facing. And that's why it is so critically important that we stay actively engaged, that we stay actively involved, because otherwise we capitulate to this right-wing net jobbery. And I looked up the data from the Anti-Defamation League on anti-Semitic hate crimes from 2002 to 2023. They've documented them all. And they even let you filter out the source of the ideological hate crime. And so I looked up from so-called Islamists, effectively Muslims, and leftists, anyone left of center. And guess what? They comprise, according to the ADL, exactly 0% of anti-Semitic hate crimes over the last 21 years. And then you look up and you filter by right-wing or white supremacist or right-wing political or anti-government from the right, and they have more than 3,000 documented anti-Semitic hate crimes from the right. In fact, 100% of them. So let's not be fooled by the media narrative that these protests on campus are some left-wing dream of anti-Semitism. No, they are people on the center left, and actually even some on the right, Jews, Muslims, Christians, people of all faiths and no faiths, united on this principle that we cannot tolerate this horrific siege on Gaza, and we must stand united to end this, because none of us are free until all of us are free. Because the receipts from the ADL itself shows that the vast majority, if not 100%, of anti-Semitic hate crimes are from the right. And now the people on the right are trying to demonize and project their own hatred to people on the left. Don't let them do it. When we come back from break, we'll be speaking with two amazing attorneys, Anna McGinn, who's an attorney at the Great North Innocence Project out of Minneapolis, Jazz Hampton, co-founder and CEO of Turn Signal, both working on access to justice, which is, God knows, that's one thing we need more of in this country and in this world right now. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. We'll be right back with Anna McGinn and Jazz Hampton after this break. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. I'm extraordinarily excited about this week's show because we're talking about access to justice in a system that is, unfortunately, in many ways, inherently unjust. And we'll dive into what that means. We have a returning guest, my good friend Jazz Hampton, co-founder and CEO of Turn Signal, and a new friend who I'm excited to welcome, Anna McGinn. Anna is an attorney at the Great North Innocence Project out of Minneapolis. She represents men and women who are wrongfully convicted in Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota. She did go to Notre Dame Law, so that might make you love her even more, or have to question whether you trust her, but I can vouch for her. She's fantastic. Anna, Jazz, thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Honored to be here. Glad to be back. Thanks.
You know, I really admire both of you so much because we often talk about social justice, we talk about activism, we talk about, combating some of the systemically racist or classist issues that we face. You guys are doing the work, and you're leading by example. And Jazz, we've had you on before, so I'm gonna skip you just for a second because I really want to dive into Anna first to introduce her. You are working at a pretty amazing organization. The mission and scope is of the Great North Innocence Project is one that it's kind of like my song, it's my jam. Can you talk a little bit more about this organization and what you guys are ultimately trying to accomplish?
Yeah, sure. So most of the time, the criminal legal system works pretty well. People that are accused of crimes are guilty of them and are convicted, plead guilty, found guilty by a jury of their peers. But sometimes things go horribly wrong and an innocent person goes to prison for a crime they did not commit. I think that, the numbers of wrongful convictions are hard to quantify exactly, particularly given the fact that people plead guilty to crimes that they did not commit all the time. But moderate estimates range from 2 to 5% of people are innocent of the crimes they've been committed. And so if you think about the fact that the United States has such a large prison population, I think it's about 2.3 million.
Yeah.
If we take that modest 2% value, that's what, 46,000 people could be in prison or convicted of crimes that they did not commit. And that's a massive amount of human suffering.
It's a whole city, and you think about not just the suffering of the individual, but the family members who depended on that individual, the economic impact. You think about the racial impact, because unfortunately Black and Latino Americans are disproportionately targeted Some studies, in fact, one in Chicago last year, showed that law enforcement targets Black and Latino drivers up to 10 times the rate of white drivers. And so you see kind of a cascading effect of how that harms society. And Jazz, turning to you, I think one of the things that really inspires me about Turn Signal is this focus on access to justice and this recognition that while we're not going to solve every single problem overnight, we can create an environment where people who historically have not had access to justice have access. And I think one of the best descriptions you ever gave to me about Turn Signal was that, when you have a medical emergency, there's an ER you can go to and make sure that medical emergency doesn't become fatal or catastrophic, or at least give yourself the best chance possible. When you have a legal emergency, when you're stopped by law enforcement, you don't have necessarily legal access to an attorney who can, vouch for you or protect your rights or guide you on what to do. Turn Signal solves that problem in a meaningful way. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the philosophy behind that?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And so Turn Signal, for anyone who doesn't know, connects drivers to an attorney on a video call the second you're pulled over. So you're pulled over and there's an attorney there looking you eye to eye and seeing what's happening in the vehicle and guiding you through it. And you said it exactly right. When you're in this is your first interaction with the criminal justice system on that journey. People think that the first step of needing a lawyer, having to talk to a lawyer, is when you're in court. Oftentimes it's too late then.
Yeah.
We have to be there in the moment when the interaction is beginning. I cannot tell you how often we hear stories of people saying, like, I wish I just would have known that I didn't have to allow them to do X, Y, or Z, or that I had the right to say no about searching my car, and so many things that happen. And you're exactly right. The disproportionate rates of communities of color being, pulled over, the disproportionate rates of them being searched, and then the actual inverse disproportion of contraband being found during those searches of people of color. The statistics are staggering. And so we just want to be there to help. And more than anything, what we always say is, what a great time to provide just peace of mind to that individual to feel safer in that moment when they're really nervous, and to their loved ones at home when they're handing the keys, whether it's, their 16-year-old, son or daughter, or it's their significant other driving to work. It's really important to have that peace of mind.
A recent study just came out, Jazz, that 60% of people report being pulled over by law enforcement as a traumatic experience. And that to me it's not only unacceptable, but it's kind of frightening. It's horrifying, because when people are suffering through trauma, they don't necessarily act rationally, right? They may not act in the most logical way, and that can impute guilt, it can impute suspicion, it can escalate the problem even more. And it can go to the extreme. The data shows that 11%, at least 11% of executions in the United States are of innocent people. And kind of coming back to you, Anna, when we talk about exonerations and whatnot, this is not only, not to minimize it, it's not only about ensuring that people who are wrongfully convicted are not serving the prison sentences. It's literally a life and death matter in many respects. Can you kind of help us understand the process of exoneration? What does that look like? What are the steps that your organization takes? How do you identify a potential wrongful conviction? And how do you go about securing the release? It sounds like it's like a crucible of a task to accomplish, even for one person.
Yeah, thanks. It's a lot harder than most people realize, I think, for a lot of structural reasons. So when you're convicted of a crime in the United States, and let's talk about Minnesota specifically, because that's the state I know the best, obviously. You get one free appeal, and after your appeal is affirmed by the appellate court, your conviction is considered final, and that's when we can step in. But it's important to keep in mind that the presumption of innocence is gone at this point. You are presumed guilty, and you've been found guilty by a jury of your peers, or you've pleaded guilty. And so you're starting from a you're starting with a very high, steep uphill battle to prove your innocence. It's really, really hard to prove a negative.
Yeah.
The example my coworker gave when he testified to the recently was, could you give me clear and convincing evidence that Bigfoot does not exist?
Jeez.
You probably couldn't. But so it's really hard to prove a negative absent DNA evidence, which is a increasingly small number of our cases because, now that we're looking at cases from the early aughts, the DNA technology existed at that point. So we're looking at a lot of non-DNA cases. And, there are some trends in wrongful convictions that we look for. Whether there was a bad eyewitness identification, whether there were known bad actors like jailhouse informants or certain individuals from the government that have a history of lying or fabricating evidence, whether or not there's signs of a false confession, whether or not there's some misleading forensic science that we're aware of, and the changing of the scientific landscape. So those sorts of things we look at quite a bit. In the case that Jazz and I worked on together, there was a really bad eyewitness identification. And that was the main evidence that was used to convict our client, who tragically spent 20 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. So, on the front end, we're kind of, when we get our applications, we're looking for those red flags. And it is not only an analysis of whether or not the person is innocent, but also what legal avenues we could even take to obtain relief for them.
And I think that's the part that to me is most depressing, that the presumption of guilt at that point. And you're facing an uphill battle. And a couple of days ago is the anniversary of the Supreme Court ruling that there are inherent biases in the criminal justice system. And just because there are inherent biases does not mean that a person was wrongfully convicted. I mean, it's just such a backwards way of looking at things, where, we grow up hearing the term that I'd rather let 1,000 guilty men go free than convict one innocent one. But then the exact opposite is happening here. Jazz, I know this was a case that was deeply emotional for you, and I was vicariously living through your joy. Can you talk a little bit about that? And frankly, this is not your full-time job. You were contributing pro bono work to this. What should other lawyers do to be able to get more engaged in these kinds of projects?
Yeah, it really did start with just meeting the executive director of the Great North Innocence Project. And I just had a conversation with her. And I said, hey, I'd love to join the board one day. And the day I decided to join the board, I heard about Marvin's case. And you're exactly right. Marvin, he grew up about 4 miles from where I grew up. He's my brother's age. He's about, 4 years older than I am. And he was me, and he was convicted of a crime that occurred miles away from where both of us grew up. And at the end of the day, I just saw myself in him, and there was no way, once I heard about the case, I didn't want to jump in and help. And what I always say is, for the lawyers who are considering donating their time in a pro bono sense, there's no better way to do it other than with an organization like the Great North Innocence Project, right? And and Andrew had been working on this case for over 2 years, filing motions, asking for evidentiary hearings, asking for everything under the sun to try to get a hearing on the books. And then by the time the hearing was available, I could join the team with 6 to 8 months of lead up time and be a part of a really great mission to free someone. So it doesn't take, you don't have to give 10 years of your life. You can give 10 weeks or 10 days. Our hearing, for instance, was only 3 days, right? There's a really great opportunity to give your time in a way that's meaningful. And if you can't give time, you can donate. And if you can't do either of those two, you can support and tell other people about it. You have to go to the protests, you have to go to the marches, you have to raise awareness of an issue. But step number 2 is being a part of the solution once the awareness is raised. Sure. And so working with an organization like Great North Innocence Project is exactly how I found myself able to do it in real time.
Yeah, well said. I mean, I attribute it to the time, treasure, talent philosophy, right? If you have time, contribute your time. If you have treasure, if you're of means, contribute your money. And if you have neither, or if you've already done that and you want to do more, then your talent, and that's bringing in more people into the organization. If you're just tuning in, we're speaking with Anna McGinn, attorney at the Great North Innocence Project out of Minneapolis. and Jazz Hampton, a co-founder and CEO of Turn Signal. And when we talk about some of the challenges that you face, Anna, when working to overturn a wrongful conviction, you had mentioned some that are legal and systemic, but what would you identify as kind of the one or two biggest obstacles? And maybe framing it this way, that if you had a magic wand that you could wave and it would solve this one major issue that is preventing actually innocent people from getting a fair shake at being exonerated, what would you change? What would you provide to address the one biggest obstacle that we face in this situation?
That's a good question. So the laws for post-conviction are written with the kind of starting principle that the people that are seeking relief are guilty. And so they're not written for people like our clients in the way that I think about it. It's really hard to get into court. There's very few claims that we can actually bring on post-conviction. I suppose the biggest frustration for me is that there's a rule in Minnesota and other jurisdictions that says if you could have raised a claim on your direct appeal and you didn't, you can't bring it up on post-conviction.
Yeah.
And that's a problem for us because it really limits the number of claims we can bring. It's also difficult when we have clients that are waiting for relief, and so they submit pro se post-conviction petitions. And of course, they're not lawyers and they don't do as good of a job at drafting those claims in legally cognizable language. And so then they lose. And then we are unable to bring those claims again in court. And so we're starting from a position where there's very few claims that we can bring, and that number decreases with the number of times someone submits an appeal or a post-conviction petition on their own. It's increasingly small universe of claims.
Yeah, and I think that's where, when we think about the inherent kind of silliness of not being able to bring new claims. I mean, I get the point that from a practical standpoint, if you don't quantify what you can bring up on appeal, then every person will appeal no matter what, whether they have a valid claim or not. I get all that. But for there to not be some kind of a recognition that there is an inherent flaw in access to justice, because if you don't have the financial resources, you're not going to have the kinds of attorneys that you're going to need. I mean, you got, he who shall not be named, facing, I don't know how many criminal trials right now, contempt of court hearings. He's still out of jail, where any other person would have been in jail right now. I just read an article, I just saw the headline, but apparently Harvey Weinstein, an appeals court overturned his 2020 conviction because they, whatever the excuse was. But I mean, this is what happens when you have hundreds of millions of dollars. And so I guess the question is, how do we solve that then? How do we balance the argument that, well, if you just allow anyone to make an appeal, then it'll clog up the system, versus weeding out, maybe that's the wrong word, but versus elevating those who have legitimate claims and not punishing them just because they tried unsuccessfully to be exonerated earlier on.
Yeah. So one very concrete effort that Great North Innocence Project is undertaking in the Minnesota legislature, my colleague, managing attorney Andrew Marquardt, has been spearheading the change of the post-conviction statute of limitations. So in Minnesota right now, it's a hard 2-year deadline after your conviction has been affirmed. And sometimes through no fault of the defendant, new evidence that is exonerating shows up 4, 5, 10, 20 years after the fact. And so we have been working to change that such that it's, if you have new evidence that supports a legally cognizable claim that you can prove your innocence, you should get your day in court, even if it comes more than 2 years after.
Yeah.
And that of course, there's concern that that's going to lead to opening the floodgates. At the same time, the evidence still has to support a legally cognizable claim such that the individual would be able to obtain relief. And for all of our clients, we believe that's the case. That's part of why these cases take so long, is because we have to do a very thorough investigation before we take on a client and we're convinced of their innocence. But that's one concrete way that we can adjust and make sure that people can at least be heard in court.
Absolutely. If you're, and that makes really good sense to me. And that's something that really shouldn't be a political thing. That's kind of a nonpartisan justice aspect of it. And it's always, I mean, I want to get political for a second here. And so this is me. I know you're part of a nonprofit and this is attributable to me only, but it drives me nuts when I hear people on the right talk about, we need all these guns for the tyrannical government. And then when you have an example like this of a government convicting people without due process, it's like, this is the tyranny that you're supposed to be worried about. Why are you allowing this to happen? If you're just tuning in, we are speaking to two amazing lawyers, people that I'm really inspired by: Anna McGinn, an attorney at the Great North Innocence Project out of Minneapolis, and Jazz Hampton, co-founder and CEO of Turn Signal. And Jazz, I want to turn to you for a second, because Turn Signal, I think, is really a game changer. And we're seeing a lot of, I won't call them knockoffs, I don't want to be disrespectful, but we're seeing a lot of other organizations realizing, hey, this is a really powerful idea. And what I love about Turn Signal is that now you're in all 50 states and hopefully going international. A big part of preventing wrongful convictions, a big part of exonerating wrongful convictions is preventing wrongful convictions. And the exciting part of Turn Signal is that you're doing that. You're preventing people from getting into legal trouble in the first place by making sure that they know their rights. Can you talk about kind of some of the stories you've heard, more of a qualitative? What are you hearing from your clients, your consumers, on how this is changing the game on legal access in America?
Yeah, we're seeing so many stories of people who are in a situation where without an attorney there, it would be a dramatically different outcome. Again, whether you're fighting a post-conviction hearing, or you're in a car having your interaction with law enforcement, sometimes having that lawyer there is just vitally important. One of my favorite stories is there was a driver in Minnesota. He was pulled over. And when he was pulled over, he got on the phone with the attorney and told the attorney, you know what? Because of court fines, I'm not sure that my driver's license is valid. And I'm nervous, and I've had negative interactions with law enforcement, and I am a paraplegic. And so I have special adjustments to my vehicle that are here, and I'm just really nervous, and I don't know what to do. And he said, most importantly, I have kids at home, and I'm just here with a partner driving in the car. And it was 2 a.m. And the officer came up. They had a really cordial conversation. The officer did inform him that his license had been suspended. And actually, through conversation with that driver and the officer asking, "Who's this on the phone?" and the attorney saying, "Hi, I'm an attorney here with Turn Signal, just making sure everything goes smoothly," and informing the driver of the rights that they have. In fact, the officer asked to search the vehicle, and the driver was able to politely say, like, "Hey, you know what? The attorney said I shouldn't allow anyone to search my vehicle without probable cause, but I'm more than happy to continue this conversation and have no issue being as cordial as possible." And the officer said, "Okay, that's fine." And the officer actually went back to his vehicle, came forward and said, "Actually, your passenger's license is valid. So why don't you move over to the passenger seat? She can get in the driver's seat, and you guys can go home without ticket or incident." But what the officer didn't know is when he was away from the car, the driver actually turned to the passenger and said, "Hey, can you reach out to my daughter and let her know that Dad might not be home in the morning, because I don't want her to wake up scared about where I am, but I'm worried they're going to take me to jail for driving right now." And thankfully that didn't happen, right? And I think there's a lot of credit to be given in this situation. Officers have an incredible amount of discretion, and that officer, used discretion in that moment to say, "No one's getting hurt here. No one's intoxicated. Everyone's being safe. Let's just get you home without ticket or incident." And that's what we're hoping to facilitate. We're an app to bridge the gap. We're here to say, when an officer walks up and finds out it's a Turn Signal vehicle, what I actually hope that they feel is like, "Oh, okay, this is being recorded and there's an attorney here. Nothing bad's going to happen to me, so I can be way calmer in this moment," right? And if we can facilitate that level of de-escalation, we just know that all the interactions are going to go so much better.
That's an incredible story, Jazz, and I think it speaks to the kind of ripple effect, right? We often forget that a person, when they're pulled over, and it's so ironic that we forget, but it's a human being who has a spouse or a significant other or a child or a parent or somebody that depends upon them. And for this person, his first thought is, my daughter is going to be scared if she doesn't see me. Let me make sure she's okay. That's huge. And I think one of the things, and just to double down on a point you made, Jazz, is this really is about bridging that gap and making sure it's not just drivers who feel safer, but also law enforcement knows that they can be calmer as well. And kind of this whole de-escalation aspect of it is huge. And you've represented clients in court. There's a reason why people fare better when they have an attorney representing them in court. It's not rocket science. It's pretty much
Right.
common sense. And so why not have that at the very initial onset of the engagement? And this point you made about the officer asking to search the vehicle. I train law enforcement at the cadet level when they're training, and I remember one cadet raised his hand, and it was me and my friend who's a sheriff training them, and he goes, "Sheriff, what are some tricks you can teach us to trick people into giving us consent to search their car?" And red flags went off left and right, and he's like, "Well, the first trick is to not circumvent the Constitution and to recognize that the Fourth Amendment it shouldn't be tricked into being given away." But the sheer fact that there are unfortunately some who have that mentality, this neutralizes that in many respects, and it's exciting to see Turn Signal continue to grow. By the way, Jazz, where can folks find Turn Signal?
Yeah, so you can download it whether you have a Android or iOS device. You can just go to the App Store, and it's Turn Signal spelled without the A, because we won't have an A in our name until there's access to justice for everybody. So it's Turn Signal without the A on the App Store, and also just our website is Turn Signal.
That's great. That's great. Let me come back to you, Anna. When we talk about getting involved, Jazz made up some great points. How can the public and volunteers support the Great North Innocence Project's mission? Is it necessary that you have to be a lawyer before you can help? Are there other ways of being engaged, and what does that look like?
Yeah, certainly do not need to be a lawyer. We have a great army of volunteers that are not lawyers that can bring all of their skill set, whether it's, social media engagement or accountancy or Salesforce. Obviously we're located in Minneapolis, and so our volunteers that show up in person are local to this area. But I mean, the biggest thing, aside from donating, which is obviously extremely helpful because we provide our services to our clients for free, and there is a very real price to freedom, but not everybody is able to donate. So I think one thing that's really important is raising awareness about the causes and frequency of wrongful convictions. You can find us on our social media accounts, subscribing to our newsletter, on our website. And, I think here's one quote that my mom told me when I was kind of lamenting the fact that work had been kind of hard, and we'd been finding a lot of roadblocks to success. It's the quote from the Lorax that says, "Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing's going to get better. It's not." And I think that's a really important attitude. Everybody can do something. So for our work, sharing our stuff on social media is really helpful because, if you can't donate, maybe someone else can who sees it. Attending an event virtually, reading about wrongful convictions, all of that stuff can really make a difference.
I love it. No, I love it. That's powerful. And as we close out, what do you define as success? I mean, obviously, exonerating a wrongfully convicted person is a huge element of success, but what are some of the other metrics or milestones that you look at to really gauge the impact of your work?
This is such a good question because you're right. It's really hard to define success solely as how many people can we get out of prison. It's definitely a long game with post-conviction. Some of our clients our clients for over 10 years before they're released. Sometimes our clients have to take plea bargains to get out of prison, so they're not formally exonerated. You know, that can be considered a loss in some ways. I think making sure that we are not only advocating for individual persons that are, you know, in prison and wrongfully convicted, working to change the system to ensure that it's more just and equitable for all defendants in the country. And obviously, you know, our mission is very narrow, but you know, legislative advocacy right now, we're working to pass a law that bans certain types of deception in interrogation, because you know, from our perspective, that can really lead to a lot of false confessions. So there's multiple pillars of success, and you can edit that as much as you possibly want, because that was a bad answer. I'm sorry.
Good answer.
It was good.
You're fine. You're fine. No, that's brilliant. And I think it speaks to the importance of recognizing milestones. You know, we're not always gonna get the slam dunk. You know, a layup is still 2 points, or moving the ball forward is still effective towards achieving the goal. And we'll close out with a basketball analogy. Jazz, notwithstanding that the Chicago Bulls did beat the Timberwolves on March 31st. The Timberwolves are doing pretty well. Final question before we close it out. How far are they going to go, and is this going to be the year?
I honestly, as a Minnesota fan, which is a sports fan is really difficult in Minnesota, this is the best I've felt about a team in any sport that we've had since the '98 Vikings. So I think that we are going to make it to the Western Conference Finals. That's my prediction. If everyone stays healthy, I think we can even do well there. So that's my prediction. Maybe it's a little aspirational, but I have faith in Ant and Cat and McDaniels and the entire team. So I'm hopeful.
Well, as of the recording of this, they're up 2-0 on the Suns, which I don't think I expected. So that's impressive. So they're making it to the Western Conference Finals against who?
I think. Well, we have to get through Denver first. And I think it could be the Clippers. Is what I am kind of envisioning. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll see how good the predictions are. My claim to fame is the 2008 playoff bracket. I picked every single series accurately. I picked 3 of the playoff series accurately to the game differential, and then I picked the NBA Finals. I picked the Celtics in 6.
Wow.
That was the one time where I was like, oh my God, I was like in the top 0.07 percentile. It's something insane. I've never come close to that ever since, because I haven't been able to watch. It's funny, once you become a parent, watching basketball the same way just doesn't hit. But no, we'll see how it goes. Anna, Jazz, thank you so much for just the work you do. Thank you so much for being with us. As we close out, can you both just share your websites and how folks can connect with your work?
Yeah, sure. So you can find us on greatnorthinnocenceproject.org. So all one word. All of our social media is linked on that website. So that's the best place to go. You can subscribe to our newsletter there, learn about upcoming events, all that good stuff.
Fantastic. Mr. Hampton?
Yeah. Yep. You can find us at turnsignal.com. That's TURNSIGNL. So there's no A, turnsignal.com. And then on all socials, same thing, at turnsignal. Find us, follow, support, share with anyone. I think Anna said it really well earlier. Even if there's nothing else you can do, if you can share so that someone else can, it's really impactful. The last time Qasim shared something once, I woke up and Sharon Stone was talking about turn signal. So everything helps.
That's awesome. That's awesome. My friends, thank you so much. This is the kind of work that I'm inspired by, and I'm so grateful that you two exist and are leading by example. Anna McGinn, attorney at the Great North Innocence Project, Jazz Hampton, co-founder and CEO of Turn Signal. You are listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Revenue Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. God, I just love having Jazz on. He's such a good dude. He knows what he's talking about. He walks the walk, he leads by example. And it is exciting to know that we have leaders like him driving the future of this country. And then Anna, I just got to meet her for the first time. Just an amazing young attorney doing the Lord's work. And it's exciting to see her work. Definitely go download Turn Signal. The link is in my bio on Instagram, on Twitter, if you whatever you follow me on. And then definitely check out the Great North Innocence Project and throw a few bucks their way, because this is the work that we need to continue to do to ensure we have a more just nation. As we close out, I want to announce a new project I'm working on that I really hope you invest in. It's called Let's Address This with Qasim Rashid. I set it up on Substack. You can go to qasimrashid.substack.com or substack.com/@QasimRashid and subscribe. You can subscribe for free. You can subscribe for $5 a month, $50 a year, be a founding donor at $500. And really, here's the vision behind this plan. It's about building a future that protects human rights, because global human rights right now are at historic lows, and the United States is one of the worst offenders. And I launched Let's Address This to help turn the tide and to actually protect human rights. So 3 points I want to point out, right? One, human rights are at historic lows globally. A 2023 study conducted by scholars at the University of Rhode Island found that 60% of nations have a failing grade, an F grade on human rights. Only 20% have an A grade. And by the way, an F grade is the global median. The United States, our United States, this shining city on the hill, this paragon of virtue and human rights, scores an abysmal D. D as in dog, D as in despicable, D as in dude. We rank 59th globally, right? This land of the free, home of the brave, ranks 59th globally, and we're trending downwards. This report says that we give the United States a grade of D, ranking 59th in the world. When comparing the US to its regional neighbors in the Americas, we are 14th out of 31 countries. It's the 6th worst scoring country among the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, known as OECD countries, which are sometimes taken to represent the developed world. 6th worst. And they say we note a downward trend in respect to human rights over the last few years in the United States, as well as the need for more data on the United States human rights practices. Second reason is that there are few reliable sources in media to accurately educate, inform, and empower the populace of the on-the-ground injustices and the actions we need to take to counter these injustices. The Intercept provided a stark example a couple of days ago on the failure of legacy media. For example, on this Israeli siege on Gaza, they reported that they did an analysis, and according to a leaked New York Times memo on Gaza, it told journalists to avoid using words like genocide or ethnic cleansing in occupied territory. And the analysis found that as of November 24th, the New York Times had described Israeli deaths as a massacre on 53 occasions, and those of Palestinians just once. The ratio for the use of slaughter was 22-1, even as the documented number of Palestinians killed had then climbed to 15,000. It is now more than double that at 34,000. And so then the third point is that therefore it's no surprise that as legacy media continues to fail us, America's trust in legacy media is also at historic lows. A recent Gallup poll found that only 32% maintain trust in legacy media because of nonsense like what I just described at the New York Times. So human rights are plummeting. Media shows grotesque bias, and the public is losing trust and unable to find reliable sources. So something needs to change. This is unsustainable, and this is why I'm launching Let's Address This. In Let's Address This, each week I take you on a deep dive on a single human rights issue affecting Americans and humanity. I pull from my experiences as a human rights attorney, as an author, someone who's run for office before, and I bring just really detailed, vigorous research to help disentangle fact from fiction and help people understand how to really turn the tide on the deteriorating condition of human rights. This show, Let's Address This, it's a 20-minute video program every week that will help provide a clear picture of what is fundamentally wrong with our human rights and how do we fundamentally fix it. You know, over the last 15 years as an attorney, I've represented hundreds of clients. I've written multiple peer-reviewed scholarships. I've run for office. I know how to reach hundreds of millions of people, and this is where I need your support. Go in and subscribe, and even if it's a free subscription, I will take it. But if you can, throw in $5 a month, throw in less than a cup of coffee a month, or become an annual donor at $50, because this is how we're going to ensure we have the resources to be successful. And look, I firmly believe that every dollar we spend is a reflection of the kind of future that we want to see. So I hope you'll invest your dollar in advancing human rights. This is how we're going to effectively turn the tide, by creating a mass movement in this space. I'm excited about it. We're already off to a good start. We've already got several hundred subscribers, which is really, really exciting. But I want this to get into really the tens of thousands. And that only happens with your support. Whether we're talking about Supreme Court corruption, whether we're talking about this horrific genocide in Gaza, whether we're talking about the civil war in Sudan, whether we're talking about the lack of abortion access in the United States, the prison industrial complex, the fact that schools are as segregated now as they were in 1968, or the fact that 50 billion is stolen in wages from working people by corporations. How do we solve these problems? How do we get our head around them? I want this to be the Wikipedia of human rights issues that you can consult and know how to move forward, but that only happens with your support. Go to the link in my bio, go to any of my Instagram posts and type justice. I'll DM you the link right away. And that's how we move forward. Thank you, my friends, for tuning in. Be sure to follow me on social media at Qasim Rashid across all platforms. You have my promise to continue to advance a show that builds on compassion, justice, and accountability for those in power. Got a great show lined up for next week. Be sure to tune in, same time, same place, at 10 a.m. on Sunday Eastern on SiriusXM Urban Channel 126. My friends, be fierce, lead with compassion and justice, and continue speaking truth to power. Until next week, peace.